our new series, In Their Own Words, where we're taking a moment to highlight our diverse tennis leaders. And I want to welcome you, Gary, today, Gary Rose. Gary has been a volunteer with us, working with me on the D&I Committee for some time. And I know that you've also spent some time volunteering for the International Tennis Hall of Fame. So why don't you chime in a little bit about that first, and then we'll get started in some of the questions today.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Chantal. It's a pleasure. So initially, I went to the International Tennis Hall of Fame. I think this was way back in about 2003, really as a spectator. I had gone to the US Open, other tournaments that are really big. But this one's really small and intimate. And I think it sort of captured my heart, not just the tennis tournament itself, but the city of Newport. And I went back for about maybe 2 or 3 years, and then the opportunity to volunteer crossed my mind. So I made an application, and I got accepted. The usual stuff, you know, they have to check your background, whatever. And I volunteered as a driver. So I think this was my opportunity to actually see the players, the VIPs, the board members from a different perspective. And that, I have to admit, was very eye-opening. As one of my colleagues was also a driver, and she's been there for a lot longer than I have, because she's a resident of Rhode Island. She said, this is a tournament where we see people on the way up and on the way down. And it's quite true. You see the young up-and-comers, you see the people who've been around for a while, you see the people who have come to accept the induction into the Tennis Hall of Fame. So it's a really interesting perspective from a number of different viewpoints. I was only planning on doing it for 1 year as an experience. And then I was asked if I was coming back the following year. And I thought about it, and I said, yeah, I did enjoy this quite a bit, so I'm going to go back. And it has been very interesting for me. And so I continue to do it out of pleasure more than anything else.
Amazing. That's such a, I didn't even realize that was a volunteer opportunity with the Tennis Hall of Fame. So that is yeah, very cool to know and to share. So why don't we then go into your tennis story, which I also hope you'll take a moment to highlight your committee work with us.
Sure. So my tennis story, if I go back to the very beginning, the very first time I picked up a racket, I was already in high school. I had seen the game of tennis, I never played the game of tennis. So my initial picking up a racket, essentially, that was just hitting a ball over a net. We would not call that tennis. We would call that an introduction to what tennis could become. And I think, I think for me, that's exactly what it was. I went on to college, never played tennis in college. I graduated, started working. And I think eventually I said, you like this game, you watch this game, you watch it on TV, you've seen a few local things, pick it up. So I'm actually an adult beginner. I started probably 25, 26 years ago, and I have been with the game ever since. I have enjoyed a tremendous experience in playing. At one point in time, probably about 10, 12 years ago, I actually played in a competitive ladder at my tennis club. That was really eye-opening, because I think everyone goes into a tennis match and they intend to win. But the result is not always a win. And it's a very good parable for life. You know, all good intentions don't end in the outcomes that you want, but there's still lessons to be learned. So that was sort of where I started. And I think the devotion to the game and, seeing people come up and the lessons that they have learned has essentially been a part of my tennis story. The volunteering came later, and that has deepened my connection with tennis. And so in trying to further volunteer in the arena of tennis, I retired 2 years ago. And I said, okay, so I have a little bit more time. Here's an opportunity to work with another organization. I've been a member of USTA for as long as I can remember, but I've never worked at the local level or volunteered at the local level. And so the opportunity for working or volunteering with USTA in New England came about. And so I've only been with USTA in New England for 2 years. It's been a tremendous learning opportunity, and it has been a pleasure working with you, I have to admit.
Thank you, Gary.
You bring a lot to this organization, and that's been very good to see. I think the thing that stands out the most in my mind over the short duration that I've had was that interview that you did, I think it was last year, with, I think this individual used to be at USTA as a diversity leader. That was so eye-opening, just from a tennis and world perspective, on the way people relate to the field of diversity. So that was really, really powerful.
Oh, thank you. That was really fun. Yeah, so last year at our Tennis Weekend conference, I interviewed Renee Torrado, who had moved on to Gucci fashion. And so, yes, and many people shared your sentiments that they learned so much from that session. And I get a lot of credit, but it was really all Renee. She was fantastic and had a lot of really wonderful insights. I took away, I still think about something that she said. One of my questions was, how do you bring your authentic self to work every day? And she shared that she doesn't bring her authentic self to work every day. She brings her best self to work every day. In the work dynamic alone, there's some reservations. You're not going to be your full personal person at the office. And that really struck me as such a better answer. And that's something that we all can strive for, is to bring our best self. And that kind of put me at ease a little bit. So her takeaway, she had so many other takeaways, but I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, no, that was a really powerful presentation. It still sticks with me. I understand the dynamics of what triggered Gucci to reach out to someone, because I recognize that people still have blind spots, but this one on the part of Gucci was massive.
I know, and we could literally talk about that for the whole time.
I know.
But I want to get back back to you, Gary.
Yes.
So, I really want to hear from you regarding, all the social unrest that is happening right now. I think we'll both agree that there's some very valid reasons behind that. And for me, it's been amazing to see this transformation into this kind of like, yeah, racism is here, but we kind of deal with it, to like, no, this is not okay. I'm going to choose, some individuals are choosing to be what we call anti-racist. So I'm just curious what your thoughts and perspective are, as how that all fits into the tennis conversation.
So the tennis conversation has been a really long one. I mean, there's some things in tennis that I became aware of over time by being interested in the history of tennis. And I think one of the things that has stuck in my mind, probably for over the last 20 years, was when Althea Gibson saw Serena Williams win her first match at the US Open. For her, it was sort of a coming home, that the progress that she had been a part of was not going to be lost. And I think too often, especially for African American players, the history gets lost. And there's either an unwillingness to recognize that there have been great players and they have not always come from the majority in the society. So that has really stuck with me. And I think particularly with tennis, there is a need to recognize it is always going to be a part of the conversation because it is a part of our society. And therefore, the reflections that we see in tennis quite often reflect exactly what's going on in society. I mean, we've seen that even on the tennis court with too many instances to mention. But I think it's critical that people have they've woken up and they've recognized, yeah, this has been here for a long time, but what are we going to do about it? Initially, I think there was, well, it's here, we can ignore it, we can avoid it, and we can move on to recognizing, no, it's here, it's not going away unless we do something about it. And I think that's probably the turning point that we're seeing. I'm definitely hopeful that it's not just a turning point and then we get complacent, but a turning point where we recognize we do really have issues that need to be dealt with, and we need to deal with them openly. I mean, differences are not going to go away simply because we wish them away. They're here, but they can be dealt with. So my 2 cents.
No, I definitely appreciate that. And I just want to add that I think the intense popularity behind the Venus, Venus and Serena, they have brought so much to the sport, and they've been such powerhouses for so long. It's easy to focus on their wins and kind of forget some of the other issues that have been very public. And so I think that's kind of what makes it sometimes easy for these things to kind of get swept under the rug, because it's like, well, they've won so many opens, and it's like, yeah, but what about, their issues with officials, or what did it take for them to get there? Like, we don't really focus on those stories enough, I think.
And they need to be focused on, Chantal. And the reason I mentioned this, when the Williams first came on the scene, they didn't come from the traditional, what we call tennis mills. So people were, and when I say people, I'm really talking about commentators, because I listened to some of the commentators in the early days, and it was like, whoa, where is that coming from? And let's face it, the Williams sisters did not represent the face of tennis back then. And probably even now that it's changing, it's still not. So the ideal tennis person would look more like Maria Sharapova than not even Venus, but more Serena Williams. And I mean, there's so many issues that I have heard commentators make, particularly about women's body types. And it's like, wait a minute, we're talking about tennis. What does the body type have to do with it? And I think that shows sort of an ingrained bias of what a tennis person should look like. The issue really should be focused on the person's game.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I know. It's so...
It's still around. So an example I'll give you, I subscribe to Bicycling Magazine. And on a recent issue, they had a heavyset woman who was a cyclist. But typically you would not see that on a cover. So the message to me is, yeah, the issue is about her ability to ride a bike. Let's focus on that. That's the critical element of the conversation.
Absolutely. No, and I'm so happy you brought that up, because that is such a, I think, a hidden bias almost, because it's kind of like an ingrained thing. Like, we've heard that all over sports in general, not just with Serena, but I've heard that in other areas. And you're completely right. Like, what difference does it make if they've been training they're competing at the highest levels, they get, when you're at that level, you're getting rigorously tested for, enhancement drugs and all kinds of stuff. So the focus really should be on their talent and abilities. So such a great point. So I know you're committed to this with your work with us on the D&I committee, but what opportunities do you see for the sport in general to tackle these tough issues? How do we, move forward from body commentary and some of these other things that we've touched on lately to make the game a little bit more inclusive? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the strength that tennis has is it's based on talent and drive. It's not based on, shall we say, legacy admission. You have to be good. Mom and dad can't pay your way in. You have to be good. You have to have the natural born talent. And let's face it, talent is on a spectrum. So there are people with some, there are people with a lot. But it's the ability to use that talent and drive that talent towards success. That's really what I think tennis can offer. The recognition that when you're starting a match, every player starts out equally at love. And then what you make of it from that point on is up to you and you alone. Or if you're in doubles, you and your partner. But I think that that's really a strong element that focuses on ability as the central issue rather than all of the other externalities that people tend to bring into it. I mean, if you listen to the commentary on a number of tennis matches, you'd be surprised at the things that you will hear. I will admit it's not as bad now because they have a broader range of commentators, which is a good thing to see. But there have been times when I have said to myself, did that person really say that? I mean, I know they're engrossed in it, but there are times you're left wondering.
Interesting. Absolutely. And I'm happy that we're seeing a bit of a change as far as commentary and comments. And I know that, I think with social media too, sometimes people fire things off and then they're like, oh, whoops. And then it really exposes their biases and adds, to this conversation, which we have to talk about these stuff. That's the bottom line. We're never going to move forward until we, sit down and really, come to terms with what we're hearing and making sure that if something is just not right, that we speak up against it, out against it. And, it takes everyone doing that, not just the marginalized group. And I think that's part of the turning point that we're seeing now is that there are more people in general just really paying attention and really, the blinders are off and it's I think, the marginalized groups really need help with that advocacy part. So I'm so glad that we're seeing some change in that area. Where else do you think we can make a difference? Is there something in particular in New England? And I'm throwing you a little curveball here, Gary. Is there something you think that we should be doing in New England differently, maybe through committee work or other volunteer opportunities, or if there's anything that you take it away, if there's any thoughts and ideas that you'd like to see come to fruition, please share.
So granted, I've only been on this committee for 2 years, and I like what I see. The opportunity for USTA in New England is to showcase the diversity of players that we have. I mean, I don't see enough attention nationally, quite frankly, played on wheelchair tennis, for example. And I think one of the reasons that has stuck with me there was a wheelchair tennis player who got into the International Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. It's an Australian fellow. I wish I could remember his name. But it was such a pleasure meeting him. His family traveled all the way from Australia. I picked them up at either the airport or the train station. They were dog tired because they had been traveling for so long. But we don't see enough of that. And unless we show how broad and open tennis is, it limits us to just, the Grand Slams or able-bodied tennis. But tennis is such a more appealing sport that I think opportunities to showcase its diversity beyond ethnicities would be very useful.
Thank you. And we are working really hard at that. And it's, it takes our entire staff to put this stuff at front of mind. And I have to give a little kudos to our marketing team. They do take that seriously. They're always, if they find out something, say like a wheelchair tennis tournament happens and it doesn't come from me there, it's like, the fire alarm's going off. Why didn't you tell us? And so, and that's a good thing.
Yes, it is.
It shows how invested our team is in furthering tennis exposure on all levels. And so we, but I do agree with you on a national scale. I've questioned sometimes, like, why don't we have, say like on ESPN, how come I'm never catching like a tennis commercial, even if it's not around the US Open? I was very happy to see this year, I mean, it was during US Open time, but we had one of our USTA Foundation sponsors, I think it was Jersey Mike Subs, there was a commercial, like I was watching the news and then this commercial came on about the USTA Foundation, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, because we do need to do more of that. And so that was really exciting. So I hope there's more to come in the future as far as that exposure, because that's how we're going to attract people to the game, is really showing that anyone can play tennis. There's a place for you within the sport, regardless of ability, ethnicity, race. We have it. There's something for you, and please join us and pick up a racket, and we will make tennis happen for you. And so, anywho, I will stop there as far as what we do.
I think that is a very powerful message. I mean, when people see people like themselves playing a game, it becomes a lot more accessible. And I'll be the first to admit that tennis has not always been an accessible sport. We cannot hide behind that based on where we are today. It has never been a very accessible sport. So now when I see young children, especially at the Tennis Hall of Fame, and they're looking up to people like Sloane Stephens, and it's like, wow, I could be like that. There are opportunities like that that ring in children's mind. They see someone and it's like, wow, look how good she is. Maybe I can do that too. That's a really powerful message for the upcoming generation. So it needs to be showcased as much as possible.
Yes, absolutely. So do you have any final thoughts for us, Gary? Something you may want to share with the entire sport of tennis? No pressure there, but.
No, it's no pressure. I think I gave this a little thought, and sort of what's stuck in my mind is that tennis is an international sport. I mean, if you think about some of the sports that we have, ice hockey, they're not as widely played, and their seasonality is associated with a lot of them. But you can just about at any point in time find a tennis match somewhere. Even during our COVID
I know. We are very fortunate that tennis is a safe sport right now.
That is correct. We're very fortunate in having that opportunity. But being an international sport, it gives us the opportunity to show the diversity that we have in the sport. I remember, this is way back when Li Na became the first Asian Grand Slam champion. And so we've seen a lot more Chinese on the upper echelons of the sport. And I think this is very useful so that people of all ethnicities can see themselves reflected at the highest levels of the sport. Because that by itself is a very powerful marketing tool. And it goes a long way in broadening both the acceptance of differences as well as the acknowledgement that it's really about the talent you have and the drive that you put into maximizing that talent.
That's fantastic, Gary. Thank you so much. Your thoughts are invaluable. I am so fortunate to have you as a part of our D&I committee. I, of course, am encouraging you to apply.
Oh, I did
Again,
already.
oh, good.
Yeah, I got the email from James and it had a clickable link. So I clicked on it when I read the email. So if I'm
Perfect.
accepted, I'll be back.
Wonderful. Your voice is so welcome at USTA New England, and we appreciate everything that you're doing for the sport. All your work too at the Hall of Fame. That's so cool. I would have never known that unless I had talked to you about it. So, you know where to find us. And again, thank you for sharing, and we will talk very soon.
Oh, thanks again for having me, Chantal.
All right. Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.